Okay, so I'd like to welcome everyone to our DevOps Manchester meetup. This is our 21st and our second virtual one. Got a great lineup of speakers tonight. Really looking forward to hear the stories and what we're talking about. I'll just click on the next slide. So basic agenda. Following my last meetup, there was quite a few people fed back asking if we could record these and make them available. So this session is going to be recorded, and we're going to upload the video to YouTube at a later date. So the speakers, we've got Adrian. Adrian is a senior consultant at Affinity Works. He's going to talk about how to do a cross account continuous integration and deployment pipeline in AWS. We've got Isha, who's a Senior DevOps Engineer at Accenture. Isha is going to discuss a personal journey into DevOps and hopefully inspire others. And we've got John, who isn't with us at the minute, but hopefully should join us soon. And he's a business agility lead at Deloitte. And John, we're talking about delivering better value, sooner, safer, happier, and sharing patterns, anti-patterns, learn the harder way. I'm sure as well, John would mention that he has got a book coming out, I think in November. So really interesting stuff from him. And also joining us from our DevOps meetup, we've got Andy. Andy will be handling the questions. Andy is part of DevOps Manchester group, but he's failed because he's not wearing his t-shirt, so he's going to get told off that later. Andy, do you also just a brief how we're handling questions during these sessions?
Unless Isha and Adrian wants to do it differently, the plan was just if you put any questions in the chat as we're going along, and at the end of each talk, we'll just spend a few minutes to pick out the common questions and giving you a chance to ask. But if you can put them in the chat, I'll put them together and then put them to Isha and Adrian and John at the end of each talk.
Perfect. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to let Adrian take over. I'm going to hide the videos.
Hi there, I'm Adrian. I work for Affinity Works. We're a consultancy. That's the obligatory plug over with. I'm going to share my screen. Right, okay. So talks entitled Changing Hats, because so the important part in cross-account build pipelines is getting the roles correct. So you're basically doing the stuff that you would do in a single account build pipeline, but it introduces extra difficulties because you have to orchestrate things across accounts. Here is the outline I built for this talk. I will try and talk fast. Skip the content page. Right, so first thing, have I drunk the Kool-Aid? Am I shilling for Amazon? Oop. Why am I only doing AWS technologies in here? Firstly, the pricing is very reasonable. Secondly, it's on demand. On-demand pricing is important because if you're not using it, you're not paying for it. Integrated security controls, if it's all in Amazon, you can control it all with IAM policy. And if you're building all your other stuff in AWS, it makes sense to keep it all under one roof. You can bill it in one place. You can keep it all in one, one line item in your budget. And otherwise, it would be a short talk. If I'm not talking about some of the stuff in Amazon, then I would have to ignore it and talk about other things. So code commit, the first thing in your pipeline is your source code. So we're using code commit. People go code commit, it's not GitHub. It is generally feature complete. The user interface is not brilliant in some places, but it does code reviews. It does merge requests. It does the things you're used to from GitHub. It doesn't have GitHub actions, but you can string all that together with other stuff. So the price is very compelling. You have an eternal free tier of 5 users for which you get 50 gigs of storage, unlimited repos, 10,000 requests a month, and you only pay another $1 per month for every user after that. And that's only active users. So again, it's on demand. If you're not using all 5 of those users, you're not paying for anything. Code build. The features of code build are pretty much like any other CI/CD as a platform you get these days. You get Linux containers, you get storage. Again, the free tier is eternal. It doesn't expire after a year. You get 100 small build minutes per month. As small as a 3 gig machine with 2 gigs of CPU. You usually pay ½ a cent for that. You can pay up to 75 cents per minute for code build instances, but that's like a whopping great 150 gigabyte GPU instance, and you really don't need it for most things. Code pipeline. So this is kind of code build and code pipeline kind of both occupy the kind of space that you might want to put Jenkins in if you're really old. This does orchestration. Again, it has a free tier. It's not quite as generous as the other things. You're only allowed one active pipeline. So they define an active pipeline as it has to be older than 30 days. So technically, you could just tear all your pipelines down. You're doing everything as infrastructure as code, right? It has to run at least once after that 30 days for it to count, and you pay $1 per month per pipeline. The user interface, sorry, that's Jenkins. That's kind of pretty and nice. The user interface sucks in Code Pipeline. It's not nearly as good looking. It has the same sort of elements in that you can do parallel execution stages and things like that, but it's not nearly as pretty. Aside from Code Pipeline and Code Build, we are going to need some other bits and bobs. We're going to need an artifact bucket to store our stuff in. So we store our source inputs in this, and we store our build outputs. So this needs to be accessed across accounts. So this is one of the wrinkles of doing a cross-account build pipeline. So you need a resource policy to police this. So we have our first hat, the policeman's hat, the lawkeeper. And so that represents the resource policy here. And because all code pipeline stuff has to be encrypted, you're going to need a customer managed key. If you've used KMS, a lot of the time you can get away with using Amazon's default keys. They generate default keys for most services in each account. You can't access them from outside their home account. So you need a customer managed key. That will cost you $1 a month. And it needs to have a resource policy on it, again, that permits other identities and other accounts explicit access to that key. So we get to the pipeline. So the pipeline wears the hat of the monarch. It bosses everything else around. It runs in this role, and its job is to assume roles, pass roles around, tell the action steps, orchestrate all the action steps you've placed in your pipeline. So it needs permissions to do all of that stuff. It needs the permissions to start code build. It needs to look at CloudFormation, and the permissions document you need for this is quite broad. And if you generate one in the console, you'll see it puts a lot of very broad permissions with a lot of broad patterns for a lot of services in. But wait, we're doing cross-account. She's not the queen in every account. Cross-account access. So you've got two means of cross-account access. All principals need permission to do stuff, but if you're doing it across an account, you need something more. So if the resource you're accessing across the account has a policy slot, like S3, like KMS, you can declare policy, you must declare policy to permit access to those identities from other accounts. If your resource doesn't have a policy slot, you need to assume a role in your target account. So we've got a really crap animation to illustrate this. So one can pass a role within my account. So she can tell the foreman to do things. The foreman's the build guy, so he's code build. But one cannot pass a role to another account, and we'll get onto the pilot later. So one will assume authority. So we have what I've called the ambassador, what some articles call an initiator policy. And one's will be done, and that can pass a role onto there. So we've hopped over this wall between the accounts. Okay, first step in your build pipeline, the source. So you've got the librarian's hat. The librarian's job is to check out the source code, place it in the artifact bucket. So it needs access to the source code, which I've left off this slide. But it also needs to write code to the bucket, and it needs access to that customer managed key so it can encrypt it, because it expects everything to be encrypted. Then we move on to building things. So the build is actually in the same account as the monarch, so it doesn't need to have that role assumed over the wall. It just gets passed to it. So it gets source out of the artifact bucket, so it needs to be able to read. It needs access to that key for decrypt permissions. It writes logs. It puts built object into the artifact bucket, so it needs the encrypt permissions as well. In the main, you can get away with very few permissions for this because this is just sitting on a container instance. It only needs to be able to run stuff in the container. You'll end up as root in most of these containers. So it's got a lot of permissions locally. It usually only needs permissions if you're going to store things like API keys in Secrets Manager, or if you need access to your container repos to pull images in and out. So the permissions for this can be quite limited. Deployment, on the other hand, is another kettle of fish. We've got a familiar face down here, but she's in the other account. She needs to put on another hat. You need to redefine any policy that you had in the first account here. You need it to be able to see all the CloudFormation stacks that you want to address, and it also needs to be able to pass that role over to the pilot, because it's cloud and they fly in formation. Small joke. So this role needs the biggest permissions. Whatever you want to build, it needs to be able to list it, describe it, create it, update it, delete it. That's a lot of power for one role. So you should temper the power of this role with resource name patterns. Most CloudFormation stacks will put a prefix on most of their resources, so you can usually predict what they're going to look like. So you could use code deploy. I see a lot of people, sorry, you could use code build to do deploys. I see a lot of people using frameworks like SAM and serverless, which have commands like, serverless deploy. And so they put a code build instance in their pipeline to do their deploy. And the reason I don't like this is because code build is a general purpose computing platform that's on the internet. And the default permissions that the wizards grant are ludicrous. So you just let someone plop a Trojan horse into production. The developer could put anything in that source code, like AWS nuke. So you've got a single binary here that is basically designed to destroy entire AWS accounts. So it could cause quite a lot of damage. Use CloudFormation to do deploys. It's powerful, but it is constrained to doing what it does. It can only mess with things it created. It is only designed to create, destroy, and update resources, and it's much harder to leverage it to upload your entire production database into a public S3 bucket. Okay, testing. So after you've deployed your Lambda function API, you want to test it, do an integration test. I'm presuming you've already done your unit tests in the build phase. So here we have another hat, the inspector. So this is on a code build instance. And a couple of slides ago, we just said, oh, don't use code build in your deploy account. Well, we're giving this much fewer rights. All it's got the permissions to do is talk to these functions and APIs. It's got some permissions to write logs, maybe plop a few test reports in the output section of the S3 bucket, maybe send you a notification if it's failed. So it doesn't need as many permissions as the deploy role. So it's a lot safer use of a code build instance in your deploy account, which, let's not forget, could be production. So all of this is tied together with IAM permissions. So getting them the right size is a pain in the butt. If it's too tight, things stop working. If it's too loose, bad things happen, like people uploading a production database to a public S3 bucket. So you want to build policy. So building it up from scratch is the choice I see most people making. So we've got the tweaker here. So this is the role you're playing. So ideally what you would do is you would look at your application, you would work out exactly what permissions it needs to exercise and just write the policy. And what you want is closely tailored permissions. And what actually usually happens is you write policy and you left something out and things don't work. And then you end up going round and round and round again, waiting for your build pipeline to fail. And because build pipelines can take a while, that adds a lot of overhead. Writing IAM policy feels like drawing an owl. It's hard work. There's a lot to understand there, and it's not always obvious what you actually need to do, particularly when you have services that call other services as part of their job. Like if you're accessing secrets manager, secrets through systems manager, it can be, you need multiple permissions there from KMS and SSM, as well as the secrets manager permissions. It's not obvious. So building IAM policy, the advantage of this is you never create ludicrous permissions. You never create permissions that are so broad you could basically do anything, but you're going to end up iterating a lot and spending a lot of time. So what if we approached it the other way around? What if we sculpted our policy? Start with very loose policy. You could write, you could permit ** to all resources. And that's definitely going to work. And then you tighten it up, and and then you tighten it up a bit more, and now it's a close fit. And if you try this, what actually happens is, instead of refactoring IAM policy, you will move on to doing the next thing. So you get off the ground fast, but you then have the inevitable neglect of over-permissive policy. And you can see this throughout the Amazon documentation. All the policies in the documentation are mad, overly broad. All the prepackaged policies in the IAM console tend to be overly broad. So if Amazon can't do it with their legions of programmers, how the hell are you going to do? So in theory, there is a third way of doing this. I want to try this. I've not actually got to yet. So can we automate crafting of this policy? So the theory is we start with our permissive policy. This is a product I've identified for this purpose called Cloud Tracker. This is intended for security analysis, but it's, this is security analysis. So we analyze the CloudTrail logs generated by your pipeline roles and determine whether they exercise their full permissions. So this thing will look at what code CloudFormation and code pipeline are actually doing and work out what the best fit policy for that is. And you can presumably iterate a lot faster if you've got a robot helping you. But doesn't this still leave things insecure? If you want no-touch deployments, your templates are going to have to create IAM roles and policies. What stops you creating a policy in your application template with really broad permissions and attaching it to your new roles? Boundaries. So I don't see this feature used a lot. So permissions, boundaries. This is IAM policy. You apply them to users or roles, but they don't tell you the minimum of what you can do. They tell you the maximum of what you can do. By default, anything without one of these has a boundary that basically says you can do anything as long as your other policy says you can. So what stops you creating a policy that permits everything? If you've got a boundary, nothing. And what stops you attaching it to a role? Again, it's still nothing. But, so here's our cowboy policy. It's overly broad. It's going to mosey on down to the S3 bucket and publish all your data. But we've already said we have defined a boundary on the role the monarch is operating in. So let's say that, maybe that's the Magna Carta. It says you can't create roles without boundaries. So the pilot then will have to impose a boundary on the cowboy, and here we have the guardsman. So you put a deployment boundary on the pilot. Policy says you can't create roles without an application boundary. Call it the reservation. You can still create policy for roles that does anything, like a cowboy, but any action that's not within the bounds of the reservation will be denied. So you keep the reservation to resource classes you expect your application to access, and even resource patterns as well. So you can put a boundary on that says, right, I only expect you to touch DynamoDB and EC2. You're not allowed to go anywhere near S3. You're not allowed to publish. And of course, you keep things away from IAM, because then otherwise they'll just start writing their own policy, creating their own roles. So you can permit differential access boundaries across the various stages of your pipeline. So you've got a dev environment. You can still have your cowboy role in there, because you want developers to be able to be free and experiment within the dev environment. But as you move through to test, lock it down a bit. Production much closer to what you would actually expect the real permissions policy to look like. And you can do that for user access roles as well as pipeline and applications roles. So you can put boundaries on users that say, you absolutely can't do this stuff in production. So we have an overall picture at this point. So to summarize, we have our tools account, we have one or more deployment accounts, and we have the monarch running the code pipeline. She assumes roles in other accounts, becomes an ambassador that passes a role to the roles that you need in those other accounts. You commit code, it goes into the bucket, and it ends up deployed to your targets. And I think I'm done there. I have no idea how long I've taken because I forgot to start the timer. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah. You've sped through that really quickly. Actually, you've done fine. One of the things that I was going to ask is when you're talking about architecting these kind of pipelines, what resources have you found most useful to kind of define those roles and come to the sort of stage you've got to? Is most of this trial and error, or do you find other things useful?
So my viewpoint on this has been heavily informed by an AWS dev blog, which basically covers the same material but without as many pretty emojis. So it uses different terminology, and I've actually used those in the materials that I've written. So I've done a lot of this stuff as Terraform templates. I know I'm saying use CloudFormation to deploy things, but I'm not actually super fond of CloudFormation. The main advantage of CloudFormation is that you have a pre-existing infrastructure for using it. Whereas if you want everything to be Terraform in a CI/CD pipeline, you're going to have to create your own Terraform CI/CD actions.
Would you be able to share that blog, Adrian, just in case anybody's interested in looking further into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it has CloudFormation templates for doing this stuff in which I duly ported to Terraform modules.
Awesome, thanks very much. Just trying to check if there's any other questions here at the moment. Any questions from anyone else at the moment? Either panelists who can speak or anyone who wants to put a question into chat?
You seem to really enjoy doing those voices. Is there a different career that you've got, or is it an acting thing on the side? Great presentation.
I used to enjoy reading stories to my daughter, so I used to do all the Hagrids and Dumbledores and things like that. So maybe it is. Maybe it's just a bizarre fetish.
That's great. If there's any questions, please put them into chat. Obviously Adrian will be available, and we can pass on any questions to him. So, but there's nothing else at the moment, Adrian. So I think you're off the hook. Thanks very much for your talk.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was great, Adrian. Great talk. You had me a little bit worried at the start when you're telling us that was like 50 odd slides, but that was it was whizzed through. So awesome. So next up, we've got Isha.
Isha. I'm a Senior DevOps Engineer at Accenture. Been there for about 5 months now, and been in software engineering for 2.5 years. And before that, I was working in a care home, so I was dealing with people with Huntington's disease. And if you don't know what Huntington's disease is, it's basically, imagine someone with schizophrenia, a personality disorder, has cancer, and they're all rolled into one person. So you can imagine these people have quite challenging behaviours, and that was a really exciting
Isha,
that I really enjoyed. Sorry.
Thank you. That's right. Thank you.
That I really enjoyed, and before that, I was working in a pub and basically serving pints to people who had come off from work at 5 o'clock. I would serve them their beverage, their alcoholic beverage. So I do know how to change a keg and pull a pint if you ever need someone with those skills. And before that, I was at university doing a course in physics, doing a master's degree in physics and astrophysics. So that's a bit of background about me. And my journey to software engineering actually began with my physics degree. So we were learning Fortran to begin with, which I thought was a very bizarre language to learn at the very beginning of our journey. But I can imagine Fortran was quite big in the physics space because it deals with a lot of mathematics. But I was like, this is an old language. Why am I learning this? So I learned how to print Hello World in Fortran. That was my first exposure to software engineering. And then a former colleague of mine at university told me about this course in MATLAB. But it required someone with strong mathematic abilities, and I didn't feel too confident in my maths. I know I say that doing a master's degree in physics, but my maths was quite sloppy, so I didn't feel too comfortable taking the course. But it wasn't until my dissertation, when it came to my end of year to do my master's dissertation, there was a project for MATLAB, and I decided to give it a go, see what happens. And I remember my supervisor saying, "Are you sure you want to take that course, Aisha? You know, it's quite difficult." And I was like, oh, it'll be a piece of cake, you know, I've done Fortran, what's MATLAB gonna do to me? And I remember just finding it a real challenge to build. And to give you a bit of background about what my project was, so I was basically projecting the evolution of the universe with general relativity equations in MATLAB. So, so I was just like really struggling. I understood the concept of the physics, but with the coding, it was more of a challenge. I remember going to my supervisor many a times asking for help. And I remember it came to my dissertation, and I was presenting, doing my oral presentation, doing my dissertation. And he goes, are you sure the line's supposed to go that way? Isn't it supposed to go the opposite way, Aisha? And I actually programmed the evolution of the universe in the wrong way, but it was a learning experience, so to speak, and I really enjoyed it. And that was my first flavor to software engineering. So fast forward a couple of years, I've met my wife, we're getting married, and we decided that me working on minimum wage, because by working in the care home, it just wasn't suitable, and I had more to offer to the world. So I decided to start applying to software engineering jobs. On my resume, I didn't put that I knew Fortran or MATLAB or any of that. I just was sort of putting my experiences in the pub and in the care home as experience, because I was trying to get into healthcare businesses and healthcare industries. So I thought my care industry would be more suitable. And it was a real challenge. I was getting rejected and rejected and rejected, even for junior roles. And I was just like, why am I getting rejected when this is just like entry-level jobs? Why is it so hard for me? And I thought maybe I'm pushing a bit beyond my ability. Let's apply for graduate roles. Because at this time I was doing another master's in medical imaging because I wanted to get into the healthcare industry. So from that, I applied to this graduate scheme with Capita. That was my first exposure. And everyone's handing in their like dissertations during their job interview of their massive like 100 pages of code. And I'm there like with an Intel Pentium Gold processor computer that can't even like run the Python IDE on it, let alone anything more substantial like VS Code. And I just like write on a piece of paper my MATLAB project basically in MATLAB, and send that across and say, oh, here's some fancy physics equations in MATLAB that you can have, that showcases my skills. But that was enough to get in. That was my foot through the door, and I thought, yay, I finally made it into software engineering. And we celebrated and had a nice honeymoon in Amsterdam, and my wife got me very high on weed at that point. So come back off the honeymoon, start getting stuck into software engineering and all that has to offer. And I remember that everyone was asking me, so do you have an i5 or i3 core processor computer? And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Like, I've just got this Pentium Gold processor on my computer. Like, that's enough to get me to do coding, right? And they're like, just there looking blank faced at me, like, what are you talking about? So I'm there coding like Java applications during my training, and coding Python applications off this computer that's just there really to browse Facebook and Instagram, and I'm trying to code off it. And it was a real challenge, but I succeeded. I had a job offer to Dyson when they were making electric cars at the time. And I was really excited because I was going in as, they wanted to hire me as a software tester, and I thought, great, that's something that I want to do. So I'm traveling to London 3 days a week while still working for the care home over the weekends. So I'm working 36 hours night shifts on the weekends. I'm traveling to London from Manchester 3 days a week, from Manchester and back. which was a real challenge. But I really was determined to get the software testing engineer role. And I remember failing my software testing exam the first time round and getting really disheartened and thinking, oh, why can't I do this? Why is it such a struggle? But I was still massively determined to try and get into this role at Dyson. And then on the last day that I was supposed to have finished my training and have gone over to Bristol to move to Dyson, it got removed, and they told me the role was no longer available to me. And I just remember feeling such rage. I was like, I've traveled all this way from Manchester to London to do this role at Dyson, making electric cars, and you do this to me now. I remember just feeling really infuriated, and I was like, right, I want a role in Manchester from now on, because that's just not on. And then finally I got a role in for RBS, and that was my first real client then at Capita, was with Royal Bank of Scotland. And I remember the supervisor at the time, John Ing, was like, so where do you see yourself in 5 years, Isha? And I was like, I'm new to software engineering. I don't know much about it, but I said, I want to be an IT consultant in 5 years. Basically, I want to help other companies and other businesses architect and build their infrastructure in a way that can benefit them as a business. And he found that really inspiring. And he goes, do you know Java, Aisha? I'm like, yeah, I've been learning Java at the graduate scheme, and it's going really well. And it was going really well at the time, but I'm still working off this Intel Pentium Gold processor computer. So yeah, it was exciting, to say the least, that when I got the role and I got offered the role, because I was like, you know, I'm doing all these hours, I'm still working in the care home, because by this time, like, I'm teaching myself how to code on my night shifts at the care home. So I finally got the role, and I'm like buzzing, I'm really excited. And I get into the role, and I remember they were saying, right, so we've got this new fraud detection system that we really want to integrate with the business. And I remember trying to speak to them as a student before, and I couldn't really speak to them. They wouldn't speak to me because I had a student email. But as soon as I had my RBS email, they were straight on the phone to me. They were like, yeah, we would be love to demo to this product to you at RBS for fraud detection. It's a really exciting project. We'd love to do it. And I was so excited about the fact that I'd landed this. I emailed it, and without realizing it, emailed it to everyone in the business, including the competitor fraud detection team, who were competing against us to implement a fraud detection service in the business. And I remember the lead architect, who's actually an employee of Accenture as well now, had messaged me, had emailed me and said, you know, you sent that to over 700 people, even people that weren't supposed to know about this, Aisha. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, and I've done this at Friday at 4 p.m. as well. So it's like the worst time to do this. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've just done this, how do I recall this email? So I'm scrambling around for senior management to help me revoke this email. And luckily it did, and I'm there just dreading the weekend and Monday morning, like with a flood of emails coming through my inbox saying, like, when can they demo this? But a few saviors came to my rescue on that, and they just updated the team as to why this was happening. But lo and behold, the demo went ahead. I was in Greece at the time with my wife for her birthday. And everyone said, that demo was so amazing, we need to implement this into the project. And I was thinking, great, I've done something really exciting. And another story that I have during this time at RBS was I was playing around with Amazon Connect and was building out call flows and stuff, because I was in the telephony platform at the time. And I remember I was playing around with Kinesis streams, and I was like Dee Dee out of Dexter's Laboratory. I was like, ooh, what does this button do? Let's max it out and see what it does, not really realizing what Kinesis stream does. So I max it out, leave it for about 3 days, come back, look at my billing alerts on my personal AWS account, and it's gone from $0 to $650, and I'm just like panicking because that's half my salary by this point. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've just racked up this massive AWS bill. What do I do? So I tell my manager that I've racked up this AWS bill. He's like, don't worry, if we'll try and like pay it off on the slide, but like don't do it again. So what I did is I solved the problem myself. I actually rang up the Amazon Web Services helpline, and I said, look, I'm new to Amazon Web Services. I've never messed with it before, and I've just maxed out my Kinesis streams. I've tried deleting the shards and everything, but it's still racking up my bill. I don't know what I've done. And they said, oh, don't worry about it. It happens. We know people are new to our service. We'll just waiver the fees. And here's some help on how to implement it on a free tier account and how to put billing alerts on. So after that, I just put billing alerts on everything and tagged everything, because I was like, I am not going over this bill again. And then I got very ill with my schizoaffective disorder because I'm schizoaffective. I was actually severely vitamin D deficient, and I'm still trying to like build other things. So we moved on to the testing side of things at this point, and we were like, here, build these test cases for us. And I was like, great, I've passed my ISTQB software testing certification. I would like to definitely do the testing, because I was like, yeah, I'm good for this. So I'm like writing all these test cases, la da da da, and then it's like I break all the pipelines, all the code commit, code build, code pipeline. I break it all, and I break their unit tests. And I was like, oh no, I want these tests to pass. Why am I breaking everything? This is like the worst. And I'm still working off this stupid computer that wasn't designed for any of this. So I'm like trying to like pull from Git, and it's taking me 2 minutes to pull from Git, and I'm just like, this is horrendous. This is just not going to work for me. So I'm like telling my manager, look, I've got this really old computer. It's like 4 years old. It's not working for me. I'm breaking everything. Can I have something a bit more speedy? But like I said, I got very unwell with my schizoaffective disorder and my vitamin D deficiency, and I had to take some time out of work sick, which was unfortunate. And I remember just thinking like how to improve my body and look after myself. And I'm like, I know, I'll run a half marathon. So I'm there running this half marathon, even though I'm vitamin D deficient. And then I run a Manchester to Blackpool bike ride as well, which was like 90 miles in total. And I'm still got this computer, and I finally get a new computer. But by this point, not many people were happy with the business. So my colleagues were leaving the business to go to other companies. And I was like kind of intrigued. So I decided to then start checking out these businesses and see what they had to offer. So I remember going to a few interviews about robotics process automation, and for a platform engineer at booking.com, and they started asking me about Docker and Kubernetes and robotics process automation, and I didn't really know what these were at the time. So I started like trying to read around, get an understanding of it. Unfortunately, I didn't get the jobs because I was not skilled enough. It was pretty apparent that I didn't have the base knowledge of the to meet the criteria to get the job, but I was still very intrigued by what Docker and Kubernetes is. So I'm straight on Pluralsight looking at all this information for this to try and get an understanding, really, because it was really exciting. And once I did get an understanding and I finally left after 2 years on this graduate scheme, I told my colleagues, you know, you need to look into things like Docker, Kubernetes, robotics process automation to help you with your architecture. And I sort of just left them with, with that. And I remember I had 2 roles offered to me after I left Capita and RBS, and it was for pretty little things as a junior DevOps engineer, and it was for a company called Rinicare, which is a healthcare startup. And I remember just thinking, wow, I finally made it into the healthcare industry. I'm going to go for the software test engineer role as a software test engineer in the healthcare industry. I was like, I finally made it. And it was a bit more money as well, so that kind of helped out. But it was on the other side of Manchester. So I live in Bury, and where they were situated was Alderley Edge. And I was just like, okay, this is a bit of a challenge because I didn't drive at the time. So it was 5-hour commutes each way as I was going to do this role. And I remember they were like, right, we want you to mess around with Android Studio and we want you to build a GitLab CI/CD pipeline. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I've never messed around with this before. What do I do? And they didn't know how to do it. The senior managers didn't know how to use it either. So I was just thinking, right, who is my best friend here? And lo and behold, it was Google and GitLab documentation. And I actually managed to build this CI/CD pipeline. I built them 3, in fact. And then and one was in C++ as well. So I'm like learning all these languages. So I've built them then pipelines, and they're right, we want you to now test our APIs. And the only exposure I had to APIs by this point was API Gateway, which is just drag and drop. So I'd never like coded much in Python with this before, but I was like, okay, well, let's give this a go. So I'm learning how to test these APIs in Python. I had a little help from my senior engineer, and he was really helpful actually at teaching me the basics of coding, like how to configure things in classes and functions and simple data algorithms. No one had really taught me that before. So I was really thankful to him actually for helping me do that. And I managed to build all these test cases out for the unit test. And he's like, right, now I want you to mess around and do some UI automation. And I'd never done this before either. And I'm thinking, right, okay, what do I do? So I'm using like Selenium by this point, and I'm helping out with the automation testing with a little bit of help from Google. Google is your best friend, guys, when it comes to software engineering. And I'm building out this infrastructure. And towards the end of this 6-month journey, because I was only there 6 months because I was really struggling with my health again because the commute was just taking so much out of me. And they decided not to keep me on, unfortunately. But at the end, I managed to build a Jenkins pipeline that basically started a VM from scratch, logged into that VM, ran all my automated test scripts, and then shut that VM down. And once that VM was shut down, it would restart over until someone broke my code. And even though that job didn't stay with me, I was really pleased with myself because coming from just basically taking the ISTQB software testing qualification, but not having much exposure to the software testing, was a real eye-opener. And I got to write my own test plans, my own test strategies. I was practically like a senior there. And then I was really disheartened, but I got straight on the phone to recruiters. I was like, I need a job. I've just, been made redundant from this job. Can I get another job? And I finally got into another, got interviewed on the Thursday, found out I got the job on the Friday to start on Monday. And that was with ConnectOne as a junior DevOps engineer. And this was my most challenging, I would say. So I'm learning Chef by this point, which is a configuration management tool. And they're basically telling me, oh, we want you to configure your own VMs. And I've never done this before. So they're configuring Linux Ubuntu VMs from scratch, whilst building out these trying to upskill in chef recipes and stuff. And I'm there building that, and then I accidentally delete a cookbook from the infrastructure, which I wasn't supposed to do. I was just supposed to delete it from GitLab. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've just deleted a cookbook. It's going to take this guy 2 hours to rebuild everything. And then I do it again about 3 weeks later, not realizing what command I've done. But at the time, this company I wasn't really happy with because they weren't helping me upskill in Chef or anything. I was there just literally on my own devices, teaching myself everything from scratch. And what I do recommend is if you're ever learning to get into this industry, Google is your best friend by far, and the documentation for these vendors, so we're like Chef, Terraform, AWS, Azure, do look at the documentation because that is your lifesaver when you're like really struggling. So I only lasted a month there because I wasn't really happy there, and I wasn't really happy with the pay. I was only getting paid 28 grand, and I was there doing incident management as well, which was like Zendesk tickets. And I thought, this isn't DevOps. And they kept breaking clients' applications as well, and I couldn't understand why they weren't testing their infrastructure. So I was just like, no, this isn't for me. This is making me really angry, really unhappy. I'm going to leave. So this is about March 2020. So I leave during the pandemic with no job to go to. And then I finally have an interview with Accenture. And Accenture interview me. I tell them my story. I tell them about my experiences with this technology. And they get onto the subject of salary, and I go, well, you know, I'm on only this much, but I'm worth at least 35 grand. I told myself, I was like, I'm good. Like, I solve problems. Being a physicist, you solve real world problems every day. So I was a bit ambitious with my salary, being just a junior, because I was just a junior by this point. And I was just like there, nervously waiting to hear back from Accenture about this job offer. And they finally get back to me and they go, right, we want to hire you as a senior and we want to give you 40K. And I was just like, okay, I'm definitely taking this job because I've just upped my salary by 12 grand and I'm also in a senior position. But I'm also there like bricking it at the same time because I'm like, oh my gosh, having massive imposter syndrome because I'm like, I'm only a junior and I've kept breaking things all the time. So I was just really struggling with my sense of self-worth. But I decided to give it a go and get involved in the topics. And actually, my journey at Accenture has gone really, really well. I've managed to build infrastructure for them that have gone into live projects. I've managed to build CI/CD pipelines that were a mess and recreate them. I actually educate people who are career levels above me. So I'm actually one promotion away from IT consultant. And I was really struggling to get my sense of self-worth. And from the experience at Accenture, it's just been amazing, really. It's really helped me to get a better understanding and a better grip of how everything works. And I also just want to represent people who come from a background that's not non-traditional computer science, and inspire people who are a woman for one, and a woman of color as well, because there's not many people of color and women who are in the DevOps space, and there needs to be more representation of that, I think. So I just hope that's been an inspirational journey and story about my journey, and I'm open to any questions.
Isha, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. We've got a couple of questions come in, so I'll go straight to them if that's all right.
Yeah.
James was just saying, what do you think ultimately is a driver for you going into a DevOps-based career as opposed to other types of software engineering, do you think?
I think if you've got a passion for automation and architecting infrastructure, then DevOps is really your space to go. Development and testing are very niche areas, like because you can specialize in certain programming languages with DevOps, with development and testing. But DevOps is really about the bigger picture, I find. It's about architecting your infrastructure in a way where all your test cases and all your development is all automated in a way that's easy to manage and easy to collaborate with. And I think if you're a definite person that likes problem solving, DevOps is the space for you. It is a challenge. You will smash your head against walls sometimes with regards to things breaking, like in my case, things broke all the time, but you do have workarounds, and there's plenty of documentation, like I said, online that can help you resolve those.
Yeah, cool, thank you. Raj says, Isha, what advice would you give to anyone who wants to retrain and become a software engineer?
I would say pick a programming language that you want. There's many out there. Most popular are Java and Python at the moment. So either one of those, or even C#. A lot of people are looking for C# developers. So pick one of those languages, I would say. And also pick a cloud provider that you want to specialize in, like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, or Alibaba. Either one of those, but pick one. Because a lot of tech industries are going into cloud migration now and cloud infrastructure. And that's a massive push and a massive drive, just because it's a lot cheaper to host things on the cloud than it is to host in data centers, and it's all managed by these cloud providers. You don't have to do any of the hard work apart from just like rent out a space, like an EC2 instance, for example, which is, you know, like a laptop but virtually. So yeah, pick a cloud provider. And then try things like Freed Code Camp or Tutorial Jojo. Those platforms, they're freely available on YouTube. They will help guide you in how to build small projects that you can start to work with. And then once you feel comfortable, then you can start showcasing your work on GitHub and things like that.
Perfect, yeah, thanks very much. Let me just check if we've got any more messages. Zainab says, choosing the right employer is very critical, important, especially for juniors. What's your advice for looking for the right employers to help you upskill your existing skills?
Yeah, so I would suggest really know your sense of self-worth being one, like know your abilities and know your strengths and your weaknesses, and be comfortable with that. And also project that to your potential employers. Make it known that you are a very well-skilled person and you're eager to learn. A lot of employers now aren't looking for experience. I know there's job applications that say I want like ridiculous 12 years experience in Kubernetes, but they're rubbish. Job descriptions don't apply to those roles. But for juniors, like, it's the passion, it's the learning. Are the seniors going to be able to have the time to teach you and inspire you with new technology? Are you prepared to do the hard graft as well? So it's all about building that rapport and that relationship. But definitely, if the seniors are up for enthusiasm and for helping you out, that is the best way to go for a junior.
No, cool. Thanks, Isha. I think we're kind of running out of time, so if it's okay, I think we'll probably better move on now. But thanks, Isha. That was awesome. Thanks very much.
No worries.
Yeah, I've got a comment here from Adrian, which I think is quite good as well. It's he's put, if you're not breaking things, you're not trying hard enough, which is fine. I've got to say, Bella, with your talk, I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and really, really inspiring, great story on multiple levels. Especially like the element at the end where you're not really getting what you wanted from a job and you weren't really happy with their approach to things. And if you can't change it yourself, well, it's walk and find somewhere that you think you will. get that, and I think that's what you've done near the end. But multiple levels. I think I could have listened to you for a lot longer. But
thank you.
Yeah, really, really good. So up next, great pleasure to introduce John. I've been looking forward to this. So I'll hand over to John. You're on mute, John.
Thanks, Dave. Good evening. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm going to talk about better value, sooner, safer, happier. And this is a bit of a context switch. So a bit of a change of topic. In terms of me, so I have nearly 30 years experience of agile, lean, and DevOps, except kind of when I started out in the early 90s, the words agile and DevOps didn't exist in this context. I'm not even sure the word lean existed in terms of the machine that changed the world. And I started out as a developer on the trading floor in investment banking. We were naturally agile. We were naturally DevOps. It was a case of you build it, you run it. I was sitting on the trading floor, 2 developers, 3 traders on the right, 3 marketers behind, and we were the desk, we were the trading desk. We had multiple deployments a day. We had some form of CI/CD in the form of Unix scripts and make. So personally for me, not a lot has changed. This is Back to the Future, and this is how I have personally evolved my ways of working. You know, this is how I've always worked. Through my career, I've taken teams on the journey from traditional, heavyweight, waterfall ways of working to lightweight ways of working. And that was the term that was being used prior to the Agile Manifesto in 2001. It was called lightweight processes and heavyweight processes. So, you know, we were following lightweight processes. When the White Book came out, so Extreme Programming, Kent Beck in 2000, read the White Book and it was like, oh, this is interesting. This is kind of what we're doing. A lot of this, some things we weren't doing, a lot of it we were doing. So, like I said, during the course of my career as a business technologist, delivering value through technology, I've taken teams on the journey from traditional ways of working to more agile ways of working, agile with a lowercase a, not about an agile methodology. It's about genuine agility. For the last 4 years, I've worked 10 years at Barclays, the last 10 years of my career prior to where I am now. I was at Barclays, the last 4 years of my time at Barclays, I was leading ways of working across the organization globally, across 80,000 people in 40 countries, across 5 business lines, and I was leading on Agile, Lean, and DevOps. So I've got a whole load of lessons learned from that. We made mistakes. We learned the hard way. We did some things that I would advise not doing, and we pivoted our way to better ways of working. So I'm going to share some of those lessons learned in this talk. I'm now working at Deloitte, and I've gone from a career in industry, in financial services, to now working across industry sector with lots of companies because this is my passion. And what I have found is that, perhaps not surprisingly, ways of working, agile, lean, DevOps, has got nothing to do with industry sector. It's got nothing to do with commerce. It's organized human endeavor. So it could be public sector, it could be private sector, it could be charity, it could be religion, it could be military. These lessons around organizing human endeavor are very similar. They're the same. There's repeating patterns and anti-patterns. And it's really fascinating to share learnings across those domains. So that's me. As I said, I'm going to talk about 8 anti-patterns and patterns. These are kind of the top lessons learned. And the scope of this is ways of working across an entire organization. Obviously, sizes of organizations vary, but these anti-patterns and patterns are approaches that will, in the case of an anti-pattern, will give you a headwind and it will make a hard job harder. In the case of a pattern, it'll give you a tailwind and it will make a hard job ever so slightly less hard and increase your chances of success. Now, I like the term anti-pattern and pattern because there is no one size fits all. There is no such thing as best practice in this domain of work because it's emergent. So anti-patterns are usually unsuccessful. They will usually give you a headwind and patterns will usually give you a tailwind. However, your context is unique and in 1% or 2% or 5% of cases, what is a pattern for most companies might be an anti-pattern for another company. So if a company is about to run out of cash flow, it's literally do or die, then it might be a slightly different approach to a company which is not on the brink of collapse. So the first one is, the first anti-pattern and pattern pair is, do you want to do an agile DevOps cloud digital transformation? Or are you doing an agile DevOps cloud digital transformation? Most companies are, and most companies are calling them that. My piece of advice is if you want to do that is don't. That's my #1 lesson learned. If you want to do an agile DevOps cloud digital transformation, don't. Instead, focus on the outcomes. Agile, DevOps, cloud, digital, lean are a means to an end. They are not the end. An example of this is Nokia Mobile and the Symbian operating system. They had adopted large-scale Scrum across all of their teams. They were scoring something like 99% on their how agile are they test, which I think is publicly available on the internet, and it didn't save Symbian. I have a book to my right, which is called Transforming Nokia by the chairman of Nokia. And the reason he gives for Symbian failing was a lack of psychological safety. It was taking them 2 weeks to build an instance of Symbian. So their fastest time to learning was 2 weeks. What he said when he found that out was it was like he'd been hit around the head with a sledgehammer. He knew they could not compete with a 2-week feedback loop. And the root of that was that piece of information had not been bubbled up through people who could help fix that because there was a lack of psychological safety. So as far as he's concerned, it was the culture and the lack of psychological safety that killed Symbian. So the big learning here is focus on the outcomes. In my experience, the outcomes that fit every company I have spoken to or worked with so far is better, which is quality, value, which is the reason you're in business, sooner, which is lead time, throughput, and flow efficiency, safer, which is continuous compliance, agile, not fragile, and happier, which is happier colleagues, customers, citizens, and climate, because it is not at any cost to society or to the planet, as we are seeing at the moment with the out of control wildfires in California and the ice sheet melting in the Arctic. Again, the anti-pattern is a capital A, capital T, agile transformation. This was a mistake that I have made in the past when we started out on the journey at Barclays. We started out running an agile transformation. I was the head of agile transformation. When I went to meet leadership teams, I would say, hi, my name is John. And effectively the subtext was, hi, I'm John, and I'm here to make you do agile whether you want to or not. And that's not very empowering. That's not very motivating. Some people would high five and greet you with a hug. And thank goodness, because we've been trying to do this despite the firm, not because of the firm, for the last 15, 20 years. Other people would be over my dead body. So we pivoted, and we pivoted to these outcomes. This is what we measured. We measured these and we looked at the trend over time. We were not focused on the absolute measures. What we're interested in is the improvement trend, the vector metric over time. What we saw, quality on the left, after 3.5 years, we saw a 20 times reduction in incidents. So that's significant. For lead time, throughput and flow efficiency, we saw on average, a tripling in improvement. So the 85th percentile lead time, when you gather millions and millions of lead times, like the lead time from pulled off of a backlog to into production, so a genuine lead time, not a cycle time. Put all of these data points in, millions of them, we plot them as a distribution. I think it's a Weeble distribution is the shape it tends to draw with a long tail. 85th percentile we were measuring, that came in by a factor of 3 after 3.5 years. So on average, teams were 3 times quicker. Time to value, time to learning, time to pivot, time to reduce sunk cost fallacy. The throughput correspondingly went up by roughly a factor of 3. However, you don't want your throughput to go up by the same amount because you want to spend some of the time on innovating, spending time with the customer, spending time on improving your system of work further. So you don't want a corresponding increase in throughput for your reduction in lead time. You know, bank some of that time for continued improvement. We saw improvement in compliance, so compliance breaches, and we saw the highest ever colleague engagement scores since records began. So people were happier, and customer net promoter scores, we saw them rising significantly. And that's because we were focused on the outcomes, and it wasn't about agile or DevOps or lean. It might be that those were applied in context, but that was not the headline. So that's my lesson learned number 1. Lesson learned number 2, do you want to scale agile and DevOps? Yes, of course. Everybody wants to scale agile and DevOps. And my piece of advice here is don't descale the work first and achieve big through small. So the anti-pattern here, which I see often, is you've got a large number of people working in a traditional manner, and the application of a framework of your choice to those people, but it's still those people. And part of the problem is not that big. By way of example, at an organization which will remain anonymous, a project running in a traditional manner with about 100 people, try to apply an agile framework across the 100 people, didn't get better results. Take 5 people from that 100 people, within a matter of weeks, there was something of value in a production environment in front of the customer. The problem was it wasn't a 100-person problem. The problem was it was a 5-person problem, and 5 people were far more effective than 100 people. So descale the work first, achieve big through small. I like this description: think big, start small, learn fast. So think big is you've got your mission, you've got your outcome you want to achieve, typically articulated as an outcome hypothesis, as an OKR, as a bet. You start small as you possibly can, and then even smaller, and you learn as fast as you possibly can. So when you ask yourself the question, what are we optimizing for? We're optimizing for speed to learning, is what we're optimizing for. Speed to learning and time to the most value is what we're optimizing for. The anti-pattern is a think big, start big, learn slow. So traditional, you know, what I see some companies do, some organizations, some leaders, some business units, with a charitable intent, with a traditional mindset. If all people know is projects, big projects in a waterfall manner, what you see is people trying to implement agile and DevOps and cloud programs in a big bang manner with a project plan, 18-month countdown, big bang go live. Like, no, it's treating in an emergent domain as if it's deterministic. People have a limited velocity to unlearn and relearn. I have unlearned this and relearned this myself the hard way. This has been reinforced personally multiple times. Barry O'Reilly has written a book on this around unlearning. And organizations can try to force change, but it's just going to be new labels on the same old behavior. because you cannot force the pace of change, because people have a limited velocity to unlearn. So you have to start small, and you have to start with the people who are the most receptive to change. This graph shows the green line is the think big, start big, big bang approach. The green line is the Kubler-Ross curve, the peak of excitement, the trough of disillusionment. The yellow line is taking a start small approach instead. So organizations that the big bang, agile DevOps, lean ways of working, what I have observed multiple times is that T2 time, that's probably about 2 years, 18 months to 2 years, before an organization starts to climb out of the trough of disillusionment and chaos. However, when you start small, you're not betting the firm, you're not betting the farm, you're not, I think, stepping outside of risk appetite by trying to change too much too soon. You're locking in progress, you're locking in learning, you're creating social proof. So without a doubt, start small, apply an agile mindset to agility. Lesson learned number 3, want to mandate one way, trademark your one way best practice, nirvana for digital transformation, cookie cutter program. Don't. Instead, invite over inflict. So this is the diffusion of innovation curve, Everett Rogers, 1962, 508 studies went into this around how people adopt change. You've got a normal distribution, 3 standard deviations on the left. You've got your innovators. They are the people who are motivated by risk, probably like extreme sports, probably like skiing, wingsuit flying, parachuting, riding fast motorbikes, fast cars, basically anything with a bit of adrenaline. They're your innovators. Then you've got your early adopters, 2 standard deviations from the middle, from the mean. So your early adopters will wait until the innovators have gone first, and if they haven't disappeared in a cloud of smoke, then the early adopters are on board. Then you've got your early majority. So once the herd have kind of made a move, then the early majority will join them. Then you've got your late majority, who will be like the last of the party. Right, okay, like I'll go on then. If everyone else is doing it, I don't want to be left out. And then you've got your laggards, and your laggards will just not join the party at all. They'll go somewhere else. Innovators and early adopters are motivated by scarcity and wanting to be different. A lesson I've learned here is once better ways of working, agile, lean ways of working became the norm, the innovators were no longer the odd ones out. And what I started seeing, what I have observed, is some innovators started moving on and going elsewhere. And what I realized afterwards is, oh my goodness, it's because they were no longer the odd ones out. So we created an exemplar community to, and what I'm doing with other companies as well is try to create an exemplar community where you keep people on the leading edge or the bleeding edge for the innovators. You've then got the early majority and the late majority who are motivated by social proof. So only once it's socially acceptable, then we'll jump in. And like I said, laggards are the grumpy cats who are like, over my dead body, am I going to change? And you have crossing the chasm in the middle, Geoffrey Moore. And again, the social proof, I think, is the key to that. You have to communicate. You have to celebrate the innovators on the left. You have to give them pats on the back very publicly to encourage the social proof for others to join in. And it's not about other companies, it's about your company. It's not what ING did, it's what you've done. And when you draw a normal probability distribution as a cumulative distribution over time, it's an S-curve. And this is something I have learnt the hard way when it comes to change, culture change, behavior change. It's an S-curve. This is your recipe for success, I believe. Approach change as an S-curve. Think big, start small, learn fast. Keep the gradient to change low to start with your innovators. As you start to get social proof, as you start to get traction in your organization, ramp up the gradient. This could be the number of people, the number of teams, the number of product teams. And then eventually you'll reach an 80-20 rule and you'll start to tail off at the top. The anti-pattern is inflicting one size fits all, and the golden hammer. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything will look like a nail. Number 4 is, do you want to delegate change? If you do, don't. Leadership behavior will make it or break it. This is a common anti-pattern which I see, which is leaders who are adopt a position of do as I say, not as I do, and dictating change but not changing themselves. And this is about leaders at all levels. This is not about seniority. Everybody is a leader. The leadership team is team number 1. So in my experience, in terms of top down, bottom up, it needs to be both top down and bottom up. And the leadership team are team number 1, because if the leadership team, and ideally this is the most senior leadership team possible, if they're not bought in, there will be obstacles and impediments which will not be overcome. There will not be prioritization. Things will not get done, and you will have bubbles of better ways of working in your organization. But the big systemic impediments will remain intact. You need psychological safety, and coaching of leaders is important for this. A culture of fear clearly will not lead to people experimenting and improving the system of work. And intent-based leadership. This is from David Marquette, Turn the Ship Around, pushing authority down to those with information, and effectively asking people what they intend to do, or people in teams saying this is what I intend to do, rather than tell me what to do, or running every single decision up a hierarchy for somebody else to make a decision. The anti-pattern, do as I say, not as I do, command and control culture, inflict over invite, and a culture of fear-driven development. And it is disappointingly common, some of those things, unfortunately, in organizations, even organizations who are pretty good at agility with product development, still surrounded around them with milestone-driven leaders who are still measuring success based on, did you meet the milestone, rather than have you maximized outcomes? Number 5 out of 8 is, do you want to do agile in IT only? If you do, don't. This might sound obvious, however, common sense is not always common practice. And there are lots of organizations that are only exhibiting agility within IT and not more broadly. Clearly that will be limited in its ability to have a positive impact on the organization. Whole enterprise agility is necessary if there is a desire to maximize better value sooner, safer, and happier. To quote Ellie Goldratt, who wrote The Goal, a system of local optimums is not an optimum system. So if just IT is optimized, there will not be significant benefits end to end, because if there's still an annual planning process and an annual financial process, and if there's still waterfall delivery at the back end, and if there's 22 control gates, each of them with 4 governance committees, you know what? You're going to have limited upside. So you have to look end to end. Once the weakest link in the chain is no longer the weakest link, stop strengthening it. So if CI/CD or automated testing or TDD or BDD is not an impediment to end-to-end flow, is not the biggest impediment, might be time to start thinking about what is the biggest impediment to end-to-end flow. Is it the PMO? Is it portfolio management? Is it finance? And this is again why you need to have senior leader support, because some of those will require senior leadership to unblock them, at least senior leadership support. And it's people, process, tooling in that order. In my experience, this topic around ways of working is 80% culture, 80% behavior, 80% how people turn up. It's probably about 10% process and 10% tooling. And it's in that order. It's not tooling, process, people. I'm sure we've all seen the tooling-led transformations. Let's roll out Jenkins and Jira and Docker and Kubernetes, and hey, we are agile. However, still command and control, still water scrum fall, still project plans with drop dead dates, the word commitment, measuring the wrong things. So the anti-pattern is a local optimization in IT only. Number 6 is, do you want to carry on using the milestone metaphor? Surprise, surprise. My advice is don't. And this is the pivot from project to product, from milestones to outcomes, from plans to roadmaps, and from organizing by role to organizing by value. So just to expand on this a little bit, it is long-lived teams on long-lived products on long-lived value streams. And the teams are multidisciplinary. Ideally, you build it, you run it. The products are your definition of value. They are why you're in business. And they are the definition of value from the eyes of the consumer. So, for example, it might be a jet engine, a helicopter engine, a mortgage, a savings account, the ability to buy a car or sell a car. Those are your products. Those are your definitions of value in the eyes of the consumer. And then you have, and there are both business products and IT products. It also depends what industry you're in. It could just be an IT product. In the case of a mortgage, there's a business product, which is a mortgage, and there's IT products that support it, which is the mortgage processing system. Pivot from milestones to outcomes. It's not about predetermined solutions with a drop dead date. It's about OKRs, outcome hypotheses, maximizing value. We want the most value in the shortest time. So outcomes written as a hypothesis. Instead of a project plan, Gantt chart, fixed dates, change control, it's a roadmap, a rolling roadmap of nested outcomes. Quarterly outcomes aligned to annual outcomes, aligned to multi-year strategic outcomes. Going down the other way, monthly experiments, weekly iterations, daily stories, hourly tasks, ideally, multiple deployments a day, and then you're getting real-time feedback on your multi-year strategy once you see that alignment. And the by role, by value, obviously from role-based silos to multidisciplinary teams where the tribal identity is value. The tribal identity is not, I'm a developer and I sit in a team of developers. The tribal identity is, I'm mortgages, I'm helicopter engines, I am customer orders on the website, for example. Number 7 is, do you want to leave your governance unchanged? No, of course you don't. However, it won't come as a surprise that lots of organizations do leave their governance processes unchanged whilst they try to exhibit agility. Instead, build the thing right. There is a need for both speed and control. Not speed out of control, which is fragile rather than agile, and not control without speed, which is generally the traditional approach. So there's a pattern here based on prior experience. You have your quarterly business outcomes, your OKRs as the input. And then the pattern that I have found to work here is you create a multidisciplinary safety team. So where previously you have InfoSec, you have data privacy, you have fraud, you have anti-money laundering, you have compliance. So where you have these specialized roles in your organization, what I've done is created long-lived multidisciplinary safety teams aligned to the value stream. So the InfoSec person is always on mortgages or helicopter engines, or, whatever your value stream is. Just basically applying bog standard principles of multidisciplinary teams on long-lived products, on long-lived value streams. Your context is unique. There's no answer there around scale. There could be 100 product teams and one safety team. They could be one product team and one safety team. It's not one size fits all. If you're developing a restaurant menu application for your canteen, not that anyone's in the canteen eating right now, then you might not need to speak to your safety team for a quarter, and they might be aligned to more than one value stream. Again, your context is unique and your context counts. There's risk stories and there's minimal viable compliance. So really importantly, the anti-pattern is one size fits all, lowest common denominator. The most risky, most stupid team have to do all of these controls and then everyone has to do it. Instead, if what you're doing doesn't have an attack surface, doesn't have any risk, you don't need to do anything as you are, not trying to apply one size fits all. 2 control points: engage at the beginning, which is to make sure that the outcome is clearly understood and the risk appetite is clearly understood, and then validate before re-enabling continuous deployment, because there may be some mandatory risk stories, for example, encrypting data on the move, encrypting data at rest, GDPR compliance, where there might need to be a blocking story to continuous deployment, because we're just about to capture some customer data, and if we don't, we don't stop this particular stream of work, we run the risk of being in breach of GDPR and having 4% of global annual turnover as a fine, as British Airways have experienced. And then finally, the last lesson learned is, do you want to create a digital feature factory? No, of course you don't. However, you won't be surprised how many companies do create a digital feature factory, where the measure is velocity, or the measure is a count of features and how many features can we produce, which is not optimal. There is a need to go slower to go faster, or you will end up going slower whether you want to or not, because you will incur technical debt, you will incur process debt, and you will incur cultural debt. You have to continuously improve. You don't have to, but I recommend you do. So number 1, get your directional challenge. This is the Toyota Improvement Charter from Mike Rother. Your directional challenge might be better, value, sooner, safer, happier, or whatever words work for you in your context. You grasp your current condition. You understand where you are today. You establish your next target condition, which typically is 3 months away, 1 quarter. That's just beyond your knowledge threshold. It's close enough to be comprehensible, but it's far enough away to not be knowable. And then you conduct experiments to get there. And it is not a straight line. And this is where, there's a bit of an anti-pattern if you're doing quarterly planning and you are planning a straight line with a predetermined solution. I think there's room there for a bit more of an agile mindset and a bit more of an experimental mindset to maximize your outcomes, not your predetermined solution. And importantly, impediments are not in the path, impediments are the path. So if anyone says we can't do this because of HR, we can't do this because of finance, we can't do this because of procurement, we can't do this because of InfoSec or whatever, congratulations, you've just identified how you do it. Well done. Now go and tackle that impediment. If you don't tackle that impediment, it will be left remaining for you to hit it again and for other teams to hit that same impediment again and again and again. So you have to alleviate it. The theory of constraints, Ellie Goldratt, the advice there is try to identify your biggest impediment to flow, to time to value. Focus all of your efforts on basically the weakest link in the chain. So don't try to do too many things. Try to limit your WIP, limit what you're improving, tackle it when it's no longer the weakest link, move on to the weakest link, and don't keep strengthening it. The anti-pattern is inflicting a one-size-fits-all set of prescriptive practices. Transformation is done, success is declared. We have transformed, we are now digital, whatever the hell that means. Clearly, that's not the case. And clearly, you're never done improving. This is a never-ending journey. So that wraps up. Quick recap. Number 1, focus on outcomes, better value, sooner, safer, happier. Number 2, achieve big through small. Number 3, invite over inflict. Number 4, leadership team, a team number 1. Number 5, whole enterprise agility. Lesson learned number 6 is build the right thing. Lesson learned number 7, build the thing right. And lesson learned number 8 is you're never done improving. So all of this is in the book Sooner, Safer, Happier, which is coming out in November. It's 400 pages. The 8 chapters in this book correspond to those 8 patterns and anti-patterns I've just run through. Dave and Russ from Auto Trader feature in this book as a case study. Like I said, it's available from November. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions if there's time.
Thanks, John. That was awesome. Yeah, we do have a few questions actually. So one of the things James asks is, given your example of the 100-person project, there wasn't a 100-person problem, and that's 5 people. I think what he's asking is, what are the practices that get taken on by, were taken on by those 5 people that made a difference, and what can you do as the 5-person team to try and encourage engagement?
Sorry, what was the end of that, Andrew?
What are the activities that the five people in that team can do to get engagement from their wider community?
Engagement from the wider community. Interesting. So in that particular context, where there were 100 people working in a traditional manner, and then trying to work in an agile manner, but then whittling it down to 5 people. Again, like I said, the problem is it wasn't a 100-person problem. So, so it was the 5 people that splintered away were experienced at modern ways of working. So these were people who already had experience of being successful as a multidisciplinary small team. So this was not, those 5 people were not people who'd had their entire career in a waterfall traditional way of working. These were 5 people who knew what they were doing. They were also 5 people who were the most passionate. They were the innovators on the left. And they were the ones who, like, through hell or high water, like, we're bloody well going to do this. So it was, it was an element of those people stepping forward. And then also they had support, because at this point, we were focused on organization-wide ways of working. So then there was support to give them the air cover and the backing they needed. So I think that's maybe the second part of that question is, my view is you've got to have people in an organization whose full-time job it is to help improve the system of work. Because if everybody is being measured on delivery all of the time, that's tough. That's tough to then try to take time. If you're measured on feature delivery and velocity and things like that, that's hard to take time out to fix the system of work, especially if it's outside of your control. If it's organization wide, it's a changed life cycle and you have no influence over it. So organizations need to have people whose full-time job it is to help improve the system of work.
I presume those 5 people then become the story that you can try and gain some social proof and encourage more people to get on board.
Spot on. That's exactly what happened. So we were running 4 internal conferences a year, and then we started doing awards, internal awards, and that team won an award.
Cool, thank you very much. Raj, let me just double check I've got the right question. Raj says, thanks for the patterns and anti-patterns. Many people are starting to understand that they need to change what they may, and what they may need to change too. The question becomes how. What would your advice be to an organisation that wants to go on the journey? Where do they start and what are the main steps they need to take?
Yeah, so Raj, so on the how, I think that's the S for me. There's a number of answers to that. I think there's a number of points to that. The main point is the S curve. Think big, start small, learn fast. It's that diffusion of innovation curve slide. So identify your innovators. A good way to do that is a community of practice. If you don't already have a community of practice and agile, DevOps, lean ways of working, COP, I would recommend creating one if you've got enough people, big enough scale, depending on the size of the company. So I was running the agile community of practice. There were 2,500 people in it. I created it in 2012. So I knew who the innovators were, and we knew each other. We were the renegades. And so you start with the crazy guy dancing on the hill. I don't know if you've seen that video. There's a crazy guy dancing on the hill, and then 2 people come and join in crazy dancing. And then there's a mad rush as 300 people join. So you've got to find your crazy hill dancers, get behind them, give them support, and temper anyone who says, we need to go big, we need to do a big bang. It's like, no. It's like, my advice would be no. Whoa, hold your horses. Hold back on that. Nail it before you scale it.
Is there a tension there, John, between trying to get that senior management buy-in but start off slow? Is that quite a hard thing to achieve?
Yeah, and the interesting thing, I don't think it's the word slow, it's the word small. It's not slow, it's small. And that's a common misconception that some senior leaders have, which is, are you telling me we need to go slowly? No, this is back to the go slower to go faster. You need to go small. So, because the reality is when theoretically we go faster, we're actually going slower because we have new labels on old behavior and we create chaos. And then, 18 months, this initiative is dead in the water. We have to wait 3 years before anyone's got the bravery to start it again.
No, I appreciate that. One question, just check there's nothing in the chat here because I have one question, but I didn't want to jump in before anyone else. You mentioned a couple of times about talking about outcomes and talking about hypotheses and bets. That's quite a subtle change of language between that and traditional project milestones and deliverables. Is it subtle? Is it fundamental? Or how do you get people on that shift to stop getting into the habit of talking about what they're delivering and what they're trying and an outcome instead?
So again, I think this comes back to the S-curve. So for the teams who are embracing modern ways of working very intentionally, on the right-hand side of that S-curve, you've got teams who are embracing modern ways of working. On the left-hand side, you've got teams who are continuing to work in the current way of working for an organization. In most organizations, that's not 100% waterfall. It's, there's some agile bubbles in there and it's water scrumfall and it's somewhere in the middle. So to the point around that shift to outcomes, the pattern and the approach that I have found to work, again, is start small. And it doesn't need to be one S-curve, because if you've got multiple business lines or multiple value streams, you can run multiple S-curves, because multiple S-curves still add up to an S-curve. So in the past, I've run 5 S-curves, 1 per business line, and they all add up to an S-curve. And then very consciously, we experimented with teams who were going first with the pivot from project to product to value streams to outcomes, and we debugged it. We got it working in the organization. So again, we had social proof. And again, there's no quick fixes here. There's no shortcut. So get it working well in an area. You can maybe run multiple S-curves because, one of them might hit the rocks, one of them might get derailed. You can share learnings as well across, if you've got a number of S-curves, you can share learnings across teams or value streams or business units. And then you can start to extrapolate, and then you can start to increase the gradient, because then when you've got the proof point, look, we've got 10 teams, 15 teams, 20 teams who are now working this way. You know what? It's working. And we figured out how to engage with the PMO and finance. We're good to start going at a higher rate of adoption now. So again, that would be my advice. Also, what we did, language, super important. A glossary, I would highly recommend a glossary. Every organization interprets the words ever so slightly differently. So, I was talking to an organization this afternoon and they were calling their teams DevOps teams. So I was questioning, what do you mean by a DevOps team? Well, I mean a multidisciplinary team. Are they doing you build it, you run it? No, they're just building. Okay. So they're not really DevOps team. So, what does a DevOps team mean? What does product mean? So I would recommend creating a glossary as well, which is very useful for that shift from project to product and to outcomes. One of the things we did, we changed the language. In the past, we removed every instance of the word project and every instance of the word milestone from the standards in the organization and replaced them with the word product and outcomes. And that had a positive psychological impact.
Cool. No, thank you for that. Right, we've got a bit of work to do with our documentation. Cool. Thank you very much, John. Dave, just hand over to you now.
Thank you. I haven't got any questions, obviously, time-wise. Feeling a bit content now, as I feel we are, as in where I work, very much in the good side and not your anti-pattern side. So, and very much guidance you're given there, it's essentially following a lot of what you're saying. So always a pleasure listening to you talk. I would advise anyone listening to this to seek out John from YouTube. There's some pretty cool talks, especially the shorter ones for some quite different talks. definitely worth a watch, and look forward to reading the book when it comes out. Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen now, so if you can unshare yours, one last slide just to finish off. So last slide, just to wash up, massive thanks for 3 speakers. I really enjoyed all of them. Great talks. Obviously this can't be a success or an event really unless we have got good speakers. So great speakers tonight. Onto that, request for speakers. If anyone wants to speak, so first-time speakers, seasoned speakers, talks, business, tech talks, any sort of talk, feel free to reach out. And via reaching out, their feedback, it can be Twitter, you can message us on Meetup. There's quite a lot of organisers for DevOps that make this work. Feel free to contact any of us. If you are a first-time speaker and need a bit of support, we're more than happy to support that. So I'm more than happy to spend a bit of time going through a talk with someone even before the sort of meetup. We haven't got any dates in schedule for the next one, but we'll plan that in and start seeking out some more speakers. But thanks everyone taking part. It's been really good. Thank you.